I often think when America wants to go off on some sort of adventure in the Middle East or anywhere in the world where we are so ignorant of local culture, you should take those things into account. Are you ready to face that? You know, I don't think America is very well equipped to do that kind of thing and to survive in that kind of mentality.
Welcome to the LBJ Presidential Library in Austin, Texas. I'm Mark Updegrove. As an author, journalist, television commentator, and CEO of the LBJ Foundation, I've had the privilege of talking to some of the biggest names and best minds of our day about our nation's rich history and the pressing issues of our times. Now we bring those conversations straight to you. Tonight we continue our conversation with New Yorker staff writer and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Human Scale, Lawrence Wright. He shares his incisive views on the Middle East, a region marked by tribal conflicts and division as war between Israel and Hamas continues to rage. Last time you were here, Larry, we talked about your wonderful new novel, The Human Scale, but I want to go back to the region. There is so much happening in the Middle East. And I want to get your take on other aspects of the challenges that we face in that part of the world. There are certain dates which, as Franklin Roosevelt said about December 7th, will live in infamy. And since then, we've had 9/11 and we had January 6th. October 7th seems like one of those days.
Yeah.
When Hamas attacked Israel in 2023. What will October 7th mean to history, Larry?
Well, it has reordered the Middle East, but in what fashion we don't know yet. You know, I was in Israel and West Bank in February 2023, and it was an odd experience. I was in Hebron, which is where the novel is set, mainly in the West Bank. And I was walking around the old city with a peace activist named Issa Amro. And he was assaulted by this Israeli soldier right in front of my eyes. This burly young man, you know, and he's a slight young, older fellow, but he picked him up by the neck and hurled him down on the ground, Issa's head missing a curb by a fraction of an inch. And then he kicked him so strong, the soldier nearly fell down from the force of it. And he was pulled away by some other troops. Issa had done nothing except be a Palestinian peace activist. That was the cause of that was the provocation that elicited that response. And at the time, I had been observing among the Palestinian community an outburst of a tremendous agitation. And, you know, I've been in and out of the region at times, and you can take the temperature almost as soon as you get off the airplane. And I thought this was intifada weather. And I was going to propose a New Yorker story about, you know, the forthcoming intifada. And I also observed on the Israeli side this enormous complacency. And they would often talk about when the Palestinians get riled up, we have to mow the lawn. And that was the term that is used for considerable amount of bombing and destruction and mayhem. Well, this was, you know, the reverse of that. I had written a draft. I turned in a draft in August of 23 that ended with a war between Israel and in Gaza. And then in October 7th came along. And I realized I'd have to rewrite the novel, restructure it, and take that into account. It was too big an incident, too historic.
Right.
I couldn't set it before and I couldn't set it after. I just decided I would take it into account. And I know that's going to elicit some passionate feelings for from people who feel like I shouldn't have access to that date because it's sacred in some way. And I felt that way about 9/11 when I was writing The Looming Tower. I had to be really careful because this is too meaningful to too many people. But I just couldn't avoid doing that in this novel.
Was October 7th inevitable?
Violence was inevitable. October 7th is as much a part of, I mentioned the agitation of the Palestinians and the complacency of the Israelis. They are equally responsible for what happened. I mean, the Israelis were totally taken by surprise. There were military encampments very close to the border, but a lot of them soldiers were on vacation. The Israelis had the plan. They had captured the plan some years ago about the breakout from Gaza. And everything about it, including those motor scooters that go in the air and the use of drones and everything was in that plan. And when it started happening, they still couldn't believe that it was happening. And every mile or so, there's an outpost with an automated machine gun that's operated by an all-female squadron in Tel Aviv, and but almost immediately they were all taken out, and all the communications and everything was knocked out, and Israel was totally unprepared for that. And then there was, on the part of the Hamas, they wanted kidnappings. But they also wanted to kill as many people as possible. And mayhem. There was total disorder. It was just a riot. And so, Hamas is not a sophisticated organization. It's isolated. It's away from the flow of events in the rest of the world. It's a small organization. And if you read the old charter, it's kind of hysterical in terms of the United States is run by the Jews. All the wars were caused by the Jews, and other things like the Optimus Club and stuff. That you think, I don't know where they're getting their information about the West, but the truth is they're just locked up, and aside from, they're not exposed to the way the world really works because they're locked into their. I had the experience of going to talk to Hamas when I was in Gaza. And it was a strange experience for me. It was arranged that I would speak to Khalil El-Hayya, who's about the only surviving leader, top leader of Hamas, and now is involved in the peace negotiations. And we met in a school, in a classroom, and there was a semicircle of chairs with other Hamas leaders. I felt like Oprah, talking to the leader and, having the Hamas, or kind of like this. And I'd made a mistake the night before in terms of my dinner. They've had tunnels where they brought cattle and stuff like that, and then the ocean was out there, but it was sort of green from the sewage, so I wasn't going to order fish, and so I decided I'd have a steak, and the waiter said, "Would you like that well done or very well done?" And I didn't get the message, but by the next day, when I was sitting around talking to the leader of Hamas, I was really ill. And I realized as I was talking that I was going to faint, and I did. I was asking a question, and I just went over, and I was still conscious, sort of. And somewhere out of nowhere, they brought a mattress, and I lay down on the mattress and continued my interview. That was my experience with Hamas, and they were so caring. it took me by surprise. And, that's one of the lessons you learn as a reporter is that people are more than one thing. To just demonize Hamas doesn't get you anywhere. If you can appeal to the humanity of your opponent, you're likely to get further than just continually demonizing them.
Have we been too flexible with Israel? Have we been too soft on Israel, to whom we give tremendous aid and have throughout the history of the country? Are we too lenient as it relates to their policy in the region?
I believe so. I think that I think to be a good friend to Israel, you would have to have a way of guiding it towards acceptance of the other in their society. And, the idea that there are two people who can't live with each other is anti-human. Of course they can. They choose not to. And but there's a price for that decision. And, this ongoing hostility. What a friend of mine proposed that there would be, a tax break for intermarriage. That's sort of a long-term solution, but it actually, there are other, like Belgium has a hard time with its ethnic disparities. But they don't murder each other daily. It's a struggle to sort out where I stand and where you stand. That's the nature of democracy. And, with Israel, it has declared itself a Jewish state, which leaves, the more than 1 million Arab Israelis in a odd spot. And it has never declared its borders. It doesn't have a constitution. I think the world would rest a little easier if Israel decided this is what we are. But if you look at the maps that they have in Israel right now, the maps show Israel going all the way to the Jordan River. So the West Bank is in the view of the cartographers is already theirs. But it doesn't say where the people are. And I'm worried about that. I think another mass exodus of Palestinians, the extremists say that, they'll be persuaded or we'll buy them out or something like that. But in any case, they would drive them out. There would be a catastrophe. And not just for the region, but for the world.
Larry, it's clear that Hamas is a proxy for Iran. What role does Iran play in that region?
Well, it's changing right now. It's diminished from what it was last year, let's say. And I'm glad of that because it's been a very provocative actor. It has created the axis of resistance, as they call it, so that there are Iran-supported groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and of course, the Syrian regime.
Right.
And then on top of that, the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It's been a really bad actor. I'm glad to see its influence diminished. But it's not gone away, and it will try to reestablish itself perhaps as a nuclear power, which will make things even more complicated. I doubt that Israel will let it get that far, and I'm not sure that America will either. It's odd too because in some respects, if you just took a photograph of the population of Iran, it's one of the most pro-American countries in the Middle East because of their regime, which they hate. And so their hatred turns into respect for America because we hate it too. Iran is one of those countries that has so much going for it. Well-educated people, great natural resources, a strategic location, and yet it's a failure as a country, and it justifies its behavior because they say that we've created the failure. To me, one of the great, tragedies in the region, a region noted for tragedy, is what they did in Syria. And, by propping up this incredibly hostile, violent entity, the Assad regime, we don't know how many people have been killed. But in prisons alone, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people tortured to death. And it's just grotesque. I had a friend, I went to Syria, I think in 2006. I was curious about it because the Middle East is a voluble region, and for a reporter, that's great. People like to talk. But Syria, I realized, is so quiet. And so why is that? It's like the dog that didn't bark. And so I proposed that I would go to do a New Yorker story about Syrian movies because, people judge America by our movies, and I would judge Syria by its movies and talk to its movie makers. And what I found was everybody I met and in every movie I watched, people were beaten. They were beaten by their parents, by their teachers, by the cops, and it was just physical abuse was a common denominator. I remember I was having dinner with this TV director and his wife, and I was asking him about this, and his wife suddenly said, "For me, it was an enlightenment." And I said, "What do you mean? If she had been married before, did your ex-husband beat you?" And she said, "No." And then she took my little yellow legal tab and she wrote, "Raped by the police at the airport."
Oh.
And this was, I began to wonder, was it the people that had, created this culture, or was it the dictatorship, the tyranny that created it? We'll find out.
Right.
But there was a woman, and I'm not going to try to reveal anything about her personally, but she was an Alawite, which is the minority sect that the Assad regime represented, and was the affiliation with Iran because it was a splinter group of Shia Islam. Anyway, she decided to run off and join the revolution. And her father said, "If you don't come home, I'm going to kill your mother." And he did that. And I often think when America wants to go off on some sort of adventure in the Middle East or anywhere in the world where we are so ignorant of local culture, you should take those things into account. Are you ready to face that? I don't think America is very well equipped to do that kind of thing and to survive in that kind of mentality. So I always take those stories as cautionary tales about how much we should be involved. And the truth is, we're a very narcissistic culture. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're concerned with ourselves and our own creations, our own culture. But everybody knows more about America than we know about those other countries. So we play an odd role in the world. And, it's a little bit like reflective glass. They can see us and we can't see them.
You referred to Assad's fall in Syria, and it happened without Iran intervening. Iran, which had been the long-term sponsor of Syria and the Assad regime, reflecting the weakness of Iran. Why has Iran weakened in recent years?
Well, part of it has been sanctions, and but the truth is, tyrannical governments lead to failure eventually, somewhere along the line, because if you capture the spirit of a people, they can't express themselves productively, and that's one of the reasons you find like in China they try to let loose a little bit more freedom in order to create the kind of capitalism that they need to be competitive. But it's a dangerous proposition because once you let people have a little more taste of freedom and opportunity, you can see in the way they treat their tech entrepreneurs. They have a big success in this followed by a kind of crackdown because they may be getting too much power. Well, we're certainly facing that in our country. Right. But in a democracy, in a true democracy, you have to be willing to tolerate imbalances with the idea that freedom and the opportunity for people to succeed is more important. We have to try to find ways to balance things without disturbing the energy of the people. And that's what's happened in Iran. And of course, that's in Syria too. I'll tell you one story about Syria that one of the filmmakers that I met there was Orwa Narabia. And he was a very entrepreneurial guy. And he had created film festivals and stuff like that. And about a year after I got back, I heard that he had been imprisoned by the Syrian regime. And this was really upsetting because when you're in those prisons, the likelihood is you're going to be tortured. And not many people survive it. And Orwa was just a big, bear, jovial, wonderful guy. Really liked him. And what could I do? And I got my friend Alex Gibney, who's a documentarian, and we worked together on a number of projects. He and I talked and came up with this campaign, which was we get filmmakers around the world to start a campaign. And all it required was take your iPhone and say, Lawrence Wright, American filmmaker, screenwriter, free Orwa. And so this went around the filmmaking community. And about 2 weeks later, they let him out. And the guard said to him, "How do you know Robert De Niro?" So that was all it took. He said, "I don't." It was susceptible to. It's an example that I often like to use. What is powerful about America in the world is our example, our culture. It has downsides, but people want to experience the joy and the liberty that American culture displays. One time when I was a young reporter, I went to Nicaragua, which was one of the most anti-American places I've been. The Sandinistas were in control, and I went to a baseball game where they love baseball, and all the comandantes were sitting in front of me, everybody seemed to be praying. And so I had an escort that was taking me around, and I asked her if, she wanted something to drink. So I'll have a Coke. So I went up. Nicaragua was so poor, they couldn't afford paper cups, so they poured in these little plastic baggies, and this is manipulating the liquid, So anyway, despite their anti-Americanism, all they could talk about was the Baltimore Orioles. The Baltimore Orioles had 3 Nicaraguans on the team at the time, and Dennis Martinez was their ace pitcher. And Earl Weaver, who was the legendary manager of the Orioles, decided, well, let's just go to Nicaragua and play an exhibition game. He didn't ask permission. He just took the Orioles to Managua, and they played an exhibition game. And that was all people could talk about. It was America noticed us. And, also, when you see somebody like Dennis Martinez succeeding in America, it reflects on your own culture. So every country in the world has, in a way, 2 countries. One is, like in Egypt, the Egyptians that live in Egypt, and then there are the Egyptians that live in Detroit. And, you look at your uncle and you think, our life could be like that if we had those kinds of freedoms. So it's that example that America represents, and that's the most precious thing that we have to offer the world, is that example. And when we behave as poorly as we are now, it's disappointing to the world.
Larry, thank you for being here for part 2 of this very illuminating conversation.
It's been a pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
This program was funded by the following: Laura and John Beckworth, BP America, Joe Latimer and Joni Hartgraves, and also by A complete list of funders is available at aptonline.org and live from lbj.org.